But when it comes to these types of conversations, as I already told Slav, there's a lot to discuss. So when you're talking about a country as complex and as interesting as South Africa, it's actually better just to let it flow organically. Making it too scripted really makes it very sterile. I'm not I can get serious, but I'm also not a very serious guy all the time. So don't worry, even though the subject matter might get very serious. I also don't want people to just get blackpilled.
Yeah, that's something we're always wary about, because it's very easy for to just fall into that. But it's definitely worth injecting the white pill here and there, which I know
things want to go in the direction of the black pill these days. I feel like it takes a little bit of doing to balance it sometimes.
Yeah, you gotta guide it out of there.
No, there's a lot of temptation in the black pill, but at the same time, black pills pacify. That's why I always discourage it within people that listen to my show, or anyone in my audience or any of my followers. I just try to make sure that they don't take too many, because it just pacifies and paralyzes you, and that's pretty much just serving the ruling regime.
I think that's pretty well said.
Agree. Yeah. I completely agree, because there's always a delicate balancing thing we do, where it's like you need people to be realistic and not naive, but also you don't want them to just them giving up is very much. I mean, there's so much. I mean, at least in American politics, of like stop thinking about politics. Like there'll be Republican politicians that'll like write op-eds like this. Let's just say log off and grill type of stuff. Like just stop thinking about it. Like so, there's a whole bunch of like. Exactly what you said. Like, there's a lot of benefit in just getting people to give up and resign, and that's half the battle. So that's a big thing to fight.
Yeah, man, it's absolutely about striking a balance there, because at the same time, you also shouldn't let politics completely consume your life. I mean, I would describe my line of work as working in the solutions industry. So I'm working, as I told you off air, I work for AfriForum, the largest civil rights organization in the Southern Hemisphere, Afrikaner and minority rights civil rights organization. But when you hear civil rights organization, you might think of it more in a American or from a US lens, but in South Africa it's something quite different. Our politics is just so much is inverted from what you see, for example, in the rest of the Western world. And then at the same time, as I told you as well, there's just so much propaganda going around when it comes to South Africa. I mean, propaganda from the left and the right, because there's people that there are people that are equally as ideologically invested in South Africa's success as there are people ideologically invested in its failure. So that's something you realize when you start digging into the very complex but also interesting case study that is the country that I live in.
Yeah, the meaning of, like you said, civil rights is the meaning of that phrase has shifted so much in just the last couple of decades that it's become a joke of a phrase. But globally, historically, it's not. It's completely different. So it's good to get out of our domestic bubble and sort of talk to somebody from outside, because then it kind of gives us some reminder that it's not all like we're just in a weird place here. We're just we're in the PSYOP central. So
it'll be nice to kind of poke through the propaganda a little bit too, because like I'm pretty hands off usually with foreign affairs and things that aren't pretty US based, because it's hard for me to really know what it is.
Slav at Trustworthy Slav.
COH at Incognito.
CRK at black.com build.
This is the Fed Post.
Through the propaganda a little bit too, because like I'm pretty hands off usually with foreign affairs and things that aren't pretty US based, because it's hard for me to really know what is and isn't truth that I'm getting on it, what is and isn't highly propagandized, like people with interest in you believing a certain thing. So I remember I'm usually pretty hands off with all that stuff. So I'm really interested to actually hear someone that's on the ground there that has probably a less propagandized view, maybe still biased in one way or another. Obviously, as human beings, we hold those types of biases, morally or otherwise.
Right.
Yeah, a good example of that, maybe just to get that out of the way, is, for example, the issue of farm murder, something that I have a very strong investment emotionally, historically, culturally in, seeing as I am an Afrikaner and I grew up in a farming community. So, of course, when a farmer is brutally murdered, I react to it differently. And because I grew up in that type of community, I knew a lot of farmers. Most of my friends grew up on farms. So that's an issue that I hold very close to my heart, and because I have such a reverence for that community and grew up in it, there's nothing worse than me spreading propaganda and lies about a genuine issue that I have experienced in my own personal capacity.
Yeah.
So what's going on with these farm murders? Is that something that has a political side to it?
Absolutely. In South Africa, there's definitely a political side to it, but it's a very murky issue if you're looking from the outside looking in, because at the same time you have the one side, if you go more radical, like the far right side of it, saying like it's a white genocide, which is not. But then you also have the left wing side, or even just the liberal side, saying, oh, it's just normal crime, it happens to everyone. That's also not true, because you have in South Africa, let's take, for example, the fact that last year, I think, if I remember correctly, 63 farm murders happened in South Africa last year. That's according to the statistics that AfriForum has compiled. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot if you take into account the amount of murders in South Africa. I mean, we have 57 a day, but then you have to take into account that this is one profession. Imagine if in America in 1 year, 63 journalists were murdered, or 63 lawyers, or 63 accountants, or 63 politicians. Then suddenly it's very much in perspective. And then also you have to add to that the levels of cruelty that you see with these types of murders. It's not just people going into a house, robbing it, and killing the farmer. You often see very brutal torment and torture go along with it. You see 84-year-old ladies having a pitchfork stabbed through their head, or having a drill having holes drilled in their feet, or burned with a clothing iron, or you have small children being thrown into bathtubs filled with boiling water, to spare you most of the details. This is not normal crime. I can't see how anyone could see this as normal crime. And then it's compounded by the fact that you have very high profile politicians singing political chants and songs like "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer." And you have, that's a real thing in South Africa.
Where is this aggression towards farmers coming from?
There's a lot of it. There's a lot to unpack there. So I'll do my best in regards to how I understand the phenomenon. So there's the first element I think that needs to be taken into account is that farming is a very Afrikaner profession in South Africa. I mean, a synonym for my culture, the Afrikaners, is the Boers, which literally translates to farmers. Our culture is so intertwined with farming and agriculture that we named ourselves after the profession. So there is a very strong Boer and Afrikaner connection to the farming profession. And of course, the previous regime, the apartheid regime, was characterized by many Afrikaner characteristics, and by Afrikanerdom, the culture. There was a lot of Afrikaner themes and symbols associated with it. And therefore, any type of lashing out or any type of attack towards Afrikaners, the most logical way you would do that is to attack, for example, a farm, or to attack farmers, because disproportionately the farmers in South Africa are Afrikaners, which are, just maybe for some context, there's a lot of cultures in South Africa, a lot of ethnicities, but the Afrikaners are mostly the descendants of Western Europeans like the Germans, the Dutch, the French. So, and we speak Afrikaans. And then there's also, so for example, and we can get into that later before I get into this topic, but if you look at, for example, in South Africa, you can't look at it through a black and white lens. There's just too many different cultural factions. There isn't just one white group and one black group. The black group is consistent of Xhosas, Zulus, Chongas, Sothos, Pedis, and the white group is also comprised of many different groups: the Afrikaners, the Anglos, the Greeks, the Portuguese. So, but the Afrikaners are one of the prominent cultural factions within the country. So maybe to get back to that question, another element there is definitely this whole politicized debate surrounding land. So, and we can get into that as well later if you want, the statistics surrounding that. But at the same time, this is this very hot populist debate within South Africa, left-wing populism, not right-wing, where pretty much the narrative is the land is in possession of a small minority of white South Africans. Therefore, it needs to be expropriated and redistributed, something that the government is going ahead with full steam ahead. I mean, this year we heard that it seems like the green light has been given for amending our constitution to pretty much abolish property rights in South Africa. So if you take that debate surrounding land into account and you take this narrative into account, all this propaganda of all these white people are racist, they're all white supremacists, they all hate black people. I mean, the list goes on of all these foul pieces of propaganda that are directed at the white minority. If you take that into account and you take this very toxic and very explosive narrative, debate and rhetoric surrounding land into account, you can also understand why you get these types of attacks and brutal murders. I think if you look, and this is only speculation, I mean, you can't prove this. If you look at it from a political perspective, the best way to really change ownership of land is to pretty much do terrorist attacks against the farming community and make it so inhospitable and hard and difficult and tragic to be a farmer that white farmers will willingly give up their land, and that land will not end up in the hands of regular South Africans. That land will end up in the hands of the state, in the hands of politicians, in the hands of the politically connected. So there is an incentive, like I'm saying, I can't prove this, but there is a definite incentive for politicians that have that in mind to then not do anything to solve the problem, because this actually plays into their hands, that more land will be up for grabs for free or for very cheap, and then they can go forward with their agenda. So there's a lot of different reasons behind it. There is definitely many farm murders that are regular crime, but then you also get these cases of just absolute inhuman brutality, and then also the very dangerous and toxic type of propaganda and rhetoric surrounding it. Like, for example, that song that I talked about, Kill the Boer, Kill the Farmer, that was sung last year. So maybe just to finish off that point, there was a very high-profile farm murder that happened last year because of the context within which it happened. So a young farmer, I think he was 21 years old. He was killed. He was a farm manager, and he was killed on the farm, and he was hung on a pole. And then there was this big protest outside the court when the accused were in the court. A lot of farming community people came together to also protest. It was in Caracal. So if you search Caracal on YouTube, you'll find all the footage of it. Senekal. And then what happened was, when the court case started, the EFF, the third largest political party in South Africa, was also there. They were also in attendance outside as some type of counter protest. So you have to ask the question: if the main protest is against farm murders, what does a counter protest then stand for? So, and they are like radical Marxist Leninists, and this is not just me going on like a boomer type rant of like everyone I disagree with or anyone on the left are Marxists or Leninists. These guys are actually proclaimed Marxist Leninists. It's in their founding document. So they are outside the court, and while the court case is in session, while this 21-year-old farmer that was brutally murdered, while his family members are inside the court, the representatives of this political party are outside the courthouse singing the song Kill the Boer, Kill the Farmer so loud that his family of the deceased can hear it inside the court. And this is the third largest political party in South Africa.
So this is being pushed with like an anti-colonial kind of rhetoric?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's it. Take, for example, someone that is completely hyped up on critical race theory, but then you give it like a genocidal or like a murderous flavor, almost like in a Frantz Fanon way. That's what you get in South Africa. It's not just as you get in the States where there's some controversy in the schools where children are being guilted because they have white skin. No, in South Africa you get murderous songs like "Kill the Boer, Kill the Farmer" or "One Settler, One Bullet." That's another favorite.
And you mentioned abolishing property rights earlier. Yeah, could you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so I think you're all pretty much familiar with the case of Zimbabwe. It's pretty much a case study in what happens when you do expropriation without compensation. Right. So expropriation without compensation is pretty much that the state can take any piece of land, any piece of property, and they don't have to pay you anything for it. And if they identify your farm or your property as something that they want to expropriate, you don't have a choice in the matter. You're just going to end up on the street. So when you look at, for example, what happened in Zimbabwe, it completely collapsed their agricultural sector. They went into hyperinflation where, I did my master's degree partly on Zimbabwe. And I remember one of the inflation statistics. It's something like 10 to the 18th power hyperinflation. It's insane. Wow. It's something your brain can't even comprehend it.
I remember they had like wheelbarrows full of like money and like bills and all that. Yeah.
I've got a $1 billion note, Zimbabwe dollar note here. Yeah. So that happened right next door to South Africa. And now our government is trying to do the same. They also want to now amend the constitution to make expropriation without compensation possible. Because up until 2018, when this policy was tabled, the policy was willing buyer, willing seller. So the government has to pay compensation to the person that they're expropriating the land from. But now they want to do exactly what their heroes did in Zimbabwe, and they want to do expropriation without compensation. And that's unfortunately the battle this whole process is taking a very long time because there's a lot of procedural stuff that they need to go through. So every time people sound the alarm on what's going on in South Africa, foreigners look in and they say, well, they're not taking property yet. Things seem to be fine, but the problem is they are edging towards it. They just have to get all the procedural stuff in place so that they can pretty much tell the world, we did it through a democratic process. This is the will of the people. This is not some radical extreme policy. This is actually what the people want. So we're in that process now of amending the constitution, of pretty much in essence abolishing property rights, because I don't think you can say property rights exist if the government can just designate a piece of property, whether that property be your house, your farm, or your car, and say I want that, and you have 24 hours to hand it over.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
Yeah, it sounds like eminent domain in the American context, where
but here they give you a compensation for that. It's a set market prices. It's not usually great, but
right. That's true. Right. Yeah, they have to pay. So in this situation, there's no compensation. It's just we're taking the land, basically.
Yeah. Absolutely, and you get absolutely nothing, and you just have to do it. You just have to do it peacefully, and that's the funniest thing is that I can't remember which politician it was. It was an ANC politician, and in an interview, someone asked him, "Will this all be within will all this expropriation happen within the legal confines of the Constitution?" And he's like, "Yes, absolutely. We're just going to change the Constitution to make sure it happens." Yeah. Okay. And I mean, South Africa doesn't have like a leftist constitution. We have a pretty classically liberal constitution. In the 90s, when it was written, it was lauded as like the best document written next to the Bible by classical liberals, not just by leftists. So then you have to start asking the question, how can a classically liberal constitution be interpreted in this way? And then can a constitution really defend you from anything? As my colleague Aaron Zarutz always says, ultimate power doesn't lie with a constitution. Ultimate power lies with whoever is interpreting that constitution.
Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. That's very applicable to the U.S.
No doubt, yeah.
Where there's a lot of people who lean on the merits of the Constitution in itself,
the ideal,
as like some some like holy document that's somehow permeating through everything. It's like, no, dude. There's people who enforce this. There's people who interpret it, and that's really what matters. And their incentives and all that stuff. That's what really is paramount, not some idealist version of what the Constitution says. I mean, the Constitution sounds good in theory, at least here it does. It's
one of those things that's like never been lived up to in the first place, and then it's like raised as a common battle cry that's like, well, this is unconstitutional. It's like, well, fucking everything is pretty much, bro. Like it happens every single day.
Yeah, I think it's a useful lesson that I think is probably safe to say a lot of people all over the world are getting right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the government there is basically, they're in favor of these things, and there's these people who are on the ground who are acting as vigilantes. Is that sort of, they're acting individually, and they're sort of carrying out these murders because they buy into the propaganda, or is it more organized? What's basically like the organization of that?
So the thing is, like I said, I'm not going to make any claims here that I can't back up. What I can tell you is that there's no solid evidence that the government is directly like orchestrating these types of attacks, and I'm not going to make that claim. But at the same time, what I can tell you is that the government is doing very little to stop it, or even they're doing a lot to encourage it indirectly through, for example, singing these types of songs, through, for example, villainizing farmers, saying that they stole the land, that they raped the ancestors of Black South Africans, all this type of very radical rhetoric. And then, for example, when you see, and it's almost like the same type of principle that's at play with, for example, Curtis Yarvin's The Cathedral. That whole idea of it's not really orchestrated; everyone just is in on it. They know what's going on, but they are organically doing it. That's kind of what we're seeing in South Africa, I think. I don't think it's all just orchestrated and there's like a puppet master pulling all the strings. I think it's just you're letting it happen, and you're pushing the right buttons to create the environment where it happens. So when something is happening that is in your favor, you're not going to stop it. It is definitely in the government's favor that farmers are driven off their property. The government is doing very little.
This very much reminds me, honestly, of the protest movement last summer in the States, and just like the kind of like effect that had on the small business class, as one, secondary effect of that. But just like the way you're talking about this, as far as like how it's kind of being like tacitly supported and everything. I do know that over here, as far as any kind of like formalized structure goes for these kinds of political actions, there's definitely a lot of organizations in kind of civil society,
nonprofit sector,
things like that. I wonder if that is kind of a part of South African politics in the same way.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that example, because I think it operates on the same way. I don't think when the people that benefit from property prices plummeting because of violent protests, I don't think they send like a literal message to the protesters and say, you need to burn shit down because that's going to make the properties cheaper so I can buy it all up.
Oh, totally. Totally.
It's drumming it up, though. You drum up like popular sentiment towards it, and then they internalize the propaganda and ideology to such an extent that they begin to act upon the ideology itself.
Yeah, but I don't think the perpetrators, I don't think are aware of the bigger picture. They're just pretty much being driven. They're just pretty much being herded in a certain direction.
100%. We've definitely had like discussions on here talking about like the authenticity of protests and things like that. And I think that like understandably, usually the disconnect we kind of get into is just like, are these people really there? Are they all completely brainwashed, or are, obviously not, but like, are they all crisis actors or something like that? And it is, Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I always find myself not, at least speaking for the example that I kind of gave on our side here, but like just kind of threading this needle of like, these are crowds full of, fully autonomous true believers here, but there is at the same time kind of a hall of mirrors maybe set up to kind of perpetuate this behavior also.
And you can achieve all of this without giving any direct orders. I mean, a good example that I just remembered, and I like the fact that we can use, for example, the protests on your side of the big salty pond as like a proxy or of a similar type of phenomenon, because I do think it is. Where I just remember, I struggle sometimes to remember all of these journalist hacks on your side, but I think his surname is Cuomo.
For the better.
And he was saying something on CNN where he's like, whoever said that a protest needs to be peaceful or civil, or that there shouldn't
Chris
be
Cuomo.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's a great example of someone that knows what he's doing. He's kind of implying that, burn shit down, destroy things, just cause chaos, but he's not directly saying it. And no one that's doing it is hearing it and thinking like, okay, the grand master or the puppet master has now activated me. I'm going to do what I've been brainwashed to do. They just get the vibe that, I'm going in the right direction and I'm fighting the good fight. And then they organically do what benefits a lot of people that they don't even know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So
I think
go for it.
Oh no, I was just gonna say. Well, we have different nuances regarding the BLM thing that happened here amongst the three of us. We have different ways of wording exactly that phenomenon or what was driving that or whatever. But in my mind, I think a lot of it is in terms of this whole our discussion of like whether it's completely orchestrated or organic and how that divvies up. I think to a lot of degree it is organic in that I don't think people do these sorts of things without some type of desperation on their part. I don't think normal people who are content with their lives do this sort of thing, especially like the type of like gruesome murders you're describing. I don't think a sane person who's just chilling and like living a stable, regular life would do something like that. I think that has to come from a sort of desperation, like an external situation. And then I think that these people in power are sort of guiding that frustration in a way that they prefer, in a way that, that they can benefit from, that doesn't hurt them really. That's sort of how I view that balance of whether it's organic or
these conditions are created, and then like there's an ideology provided, and then they kind of go hand in hand like that.
Yeah, well,
exactly.
You can see it very simply play out. I mean, if you take, for example, the type of radical rhetoric that you have in South Africa, you can pretty much see this exactly what you're describing play out. So you have this propaganda that this white minority, they raped your ancestors, they're evil, they are less than human, they don't have real human emotions, they're just white demons. They're living on land that they stole from your ancestors. They are just the embodiment of Lucifer and evil himself. And then that sets the stage. And then the politicians, all they have to do is say, then people that are in desperate situations kind of implicitly ask the question, so what's there to be done about it? That's where you get the trigger, like a song like Kill the Boer, Kill the Farmer, Burn Down His Farm, One Settler, One Bullet. Those types of chants that are over and over then blasted towards the masses, you're going to get people that take that seriously and say, okay, that's what needs to be done. We need to exercise the demon pretty much, if you can put it that way.
Yeah, it's like a misdirection tactic, as well as like actually helping the ruling class with like their onward march of just decimating every competition that's in their way.
Exactly. You create the frustration and then you guide it. I mean, how bad what is the economic situation in South Africa in terms of like the people that commit these crimes? Like, is there a sense that they're from? Is there any like insight into where they're from or what type of situation they're in? Or
so here's the tricky thing: is that this is not the case in all farm attacks or all farm murders, but in many of these cases, nothing is stolen. that's one of the big indicators that there's a hatred or something driving it, not just poverty or necessity. And now, of course, there are cases where there is robbery or burglary that go along with it. But then you have to ask yourself, is someone that's desperate for, there's two elements to it. The one is the cases where you don't see anything stolen. There's literally just people going in, killing someone and getting out. And then you also get the cases of people with all the torture. Now, you can tell me the story of the most desperate person in the world. I can't think any person is so desperate that when they rob someone, they're going to take extra time and effort to torture that person before they get away. It's like, for example, if someone goes to hijack a car, but before when they hijack the car, they pull the guy from the car, they put him on the side of the road, and they meticulously cut off every one of his fingers before they get into the car and drive away. I mean, that's not rational. That's not something that's driven by necessity. I can still understand someone that's desperate, that's committing a crime and stealing something, but then why is there this level of torture and brutality that goes with it that not only makes the type of punishment if they're caught worse, but also takes more time, takes more effort. It goes against any type of reasoning if you're just there to rob someone.
Is there any insight to who these people are that are doing this? Like are they from a certain tribe or from a certain political leaning, or
no, there's very little cases of like an attacker being identified as being part of, for example, the support of a political party, or
Gotcha.
that all the attackers are disproportionately, I don't know, Xhosa or Zulu. It's more of a case by case thing. But we have had cases where there was a farm attack and there was spray painted on the wall, EFF, Viva Julius Malema, the leader of the EFF, the third largest party that I was talking about. So there have been cases like that, but it's not like we can say definitively, no, there's definitely a trend. All these murderers that are caught always have a connection to a party. There's not something like that I can confirm. But at the same time, there doesn't have to be really to fit in what I described earlier, where these politicians are egging it on, they are encouraging it, they are pretty much telling people this is what you need to do. You don't need a party affiliate then to really commit these crimes. All you need is when you broadcast that message, that murderous message to millions of people, you just need one or two people in a position where, or in a mental state where they will commit what you're telling them to do.
And I think maybe springboarding off what CRK was kind of talking about there, whether or not like these crimes are being done, in kind of the spirit of like stealing a loaf of bread to feed your kid or something, like needy people, like, is there any pre-existing political conditions that would maybe lead to people being more easily talked into violence like this? I mean, like the picture you're painting with like the rhetoric is certainly part of it, right? But it's still, it can still be kind of like hard to imagine just kind of up and doing that. I mean, like, is this, I guess I'm just sort of asking kind of like how CRK said, like, is there any other political situation that's going on that this is being used as cover for, or is there some kind of underlying bubbling sentiment that this is tapping into, I guess?
Well, it also fits into the larger picture of South Africa, where violence is very much a tool, very much a political tool. If you look into the history of South Africa, for example, the opposition to apartheid and the actions that were taken against it, there were many violent actions going on there. I mean, there was a civil war pretty much going on between the different oppositional parties when apartheid was falling apart. The parties that sensed blood in the water and sensed that they could gain some power through this, there was a massive civil war that went on in primarily KwaZulu-Natal between the ANC and the IFP, the Inkatha Freedom Party, which is pretty much the Zulu Nationalist Party. And there were tens of thousands of people killed in brutal fashion. I mean, one of the ways that they were killed was through necklacing. So necklacing is when you put a tire around someone's neck and you fill it with petrol and you set it alight while they're still alive. It's pretty much a political execution in South Africa. It's a tactic that ANC politicians endorsed. It's a tactic that Winnie Mandela, Nelson Mandela's wife, was actually quite fond of. And this is all on record. I mean, South Africa had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which pretty much investigated crimes on both sides by the apartheid regime and by the forces against it. And this is the type of things that came out. So this is not just me talking out of my arse. And when it comes to South African politics, violence is still pretty much ingrained as a tool of getting what you want, of sending a message. This is very much the bedrock of South African politics is very violent still, and it's something that a lot of Westerners struggle to understand. I mean, there's a brilliant book written by Anthea Jeffrey called People's War that documents this entire resistance to apartheid, but the tactics that they used. Now, I mean, this is not, this is not a conspiracy theory. The ANC, the current ruling party, in opposition to apartheid, they founded Umkhonto weSizwe, which was their military wing that planted bombs in wimpy bars, that blew up civilian targets. They were a terrorist organization, and they used violence again to get what they wanted. So this is the history of South Africa. There was violence on all sides, and this creates an environment where the reigning zeitgeist is that violence is a legitimate way of sending a message. So this then makes complete sense that you would get these types of violent attacks on farms within the context of this fiery debate surrounding land that politicians have latched onto. Naturally, what flows from that is then violent action that sends a message that serves some type of purpose within this bigger picture of fighting to regain the land that was quote unquote stolen from you.
I see. Okay. Yeah. Seeing how that kind of fits in, kind of understanding the angle there. Sure. And so
it seems like.
Oh, you go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I didn't know much about South Africa, except for I had a couple of friends from there that immigrated here like in the late 90s that I grew up with. But it just seems like, I mean, it's obviously very ripe for that type of rhetoric to take hold because of it being such a turbulent as far as bloodshed and also racial tensions go over the past, like, at least maybe it's past several decades, but at least probably since its conception, I imagine.
Well, South Africa is a fascinating place. I mean, if you really want to read one of the greatest stories ever recorded, the history of South Africa. I mean, it's a story of heroism. It's a story of villains and demons, and a story of heroes and saints, and it's a story of empires versus underdogs. I mean, even just my own culture's history, the history of the Afrikaners, is full of amazing stories. I mean, I'm 9th generation of my family in Southern Africa. My first ancestor came here in 1688. So my family has been in Africa longer than the United States has been a country. So when it comes to my identity and where I find meaning, I don't see myself as a European. I see myself as African. I see myself as part of Africa. My culture and my identity was forged here. And I understand Africa much, much better than most Americans or Europeans just by virtue of growing up here. I've got a very keen understanding for African politics, how it works, what works, what doesn't, the methods that are used, the ends that people are fighting for. And if you look at the history of South Africa, it's an incredibly complex mess trying to decipher it. But a lot of what happened in the past does have an influence on the present. It's just that many leftists tend to focus on just some aspects and say that is definitely the only cause of everything, rather than looking at the bigger picture. And that's what you need to do when you look at a complex country like South Africa. I think another country that parallels South Africa in complexity is a country like Brazil. I mean, take just the fact that South Africa has 11 official languages into account. That just shows you how complex it is. And the biggest, it's almost become a cliche, because I always get into this when I talk to on podcasts about South Africa, but I have to get this message out there because it's so important. You'll never understand South Africa if you look at it through a racial lens. If you just look at it through a lens of there's white people and black people and there's two factions, this dichotomy, that's not true. It's absolutely such a hideous reduction that nothing is going to make sense to you. You're going to see two factions within the ruling political party fighting each other, killing each other, and they're both black, and you're not going to understand why. Meanwhile, if you look through a cultural lens, you'll see, wait a minute, this is a Zulu faction and a Xhosa faction. Suddenly, this makes a lot more sense. South Africa is a country with 500-year-old blood feuds between different cultures of the same race. This is the order of the day. This is reality, and this is the story not just of South Africa, but the story of Africa, man. That's why things like Pan-Africanism is complete bullshit. This idea of like Africa can unite around racial lines, of like all these black countries can unite because they're all black. Like, no, dude. If you look at an idea like Pan-Africanism, it's pretty much the same as like Pan-Europeanism or Pan-Slavism. The only thing you need to do to shatter that utopianism is to ask just an average South African what they think of a Nigerian, or ask an average Malawian what they think of a South African, and then you realize, oh shit, this is never going to work. You're never going to have a borderless Africa. And this is the story of South Africa as well. I mean, why would, if you look just at the white population, I mean, you have the Anglos and you have the Afrikaners, the two main groups, and they don't always get along. There's a lot of tension there, because during the Anglo-Boer War, when the British Empire took over South Africa because the Boers discovered gold, they put Boer women and children into concentration camps, and more women and children died during that war than soldiers on both sides combined. Then you take a fact like that into account, and then you realize, wait a minute, this is still fueling many feuds and hostile sentiments even today between Anglos or English South Africans and Afrikaners. But if you're looking at it through a racial lens or from a white nationalist lens, you'd say, but they're both white, they should be best buds, but they're not. So that's the type of complexities you need to navigate in South Africa, and that's why I always repeat this line, because people keep making the same mistake.
I think that's very interesting, because the idea of tribalism, at least in America, falls into race reductionist lines. But when you think about it globally, like you said, it's way more complicated than that. Tribalism is more complicated than just the 5 boxes on the census that we have that you check off, for like, are you, these 5 categories or whatever. It's a lot more complicated. I mean, like there's liberals in America that would tell me stuff like, racism can only be from white people because they're the superior race, basically is what they're saying. And I'll basically be like, I'd be like, if you expand beyond America, right? America's fairly new. It's like a baby nation compared to the history of all these other countries. If you expand out a little bit, like, it's there's plenty of long periods of history where white people are not running things globally. Like there's plenty of periods like that, the Ottomans and the Mongols, and it goes on. Like it's too simplistic to reduce it to that. And like it was always a weird argument I'd hear, and I'd just be like, like there's a whole world out there, there's whole history, like, it's not as simple as like it's almost basically buying into the idea that there's something unique about white people that makes them inherently superior. These woke people on the left are basically agreeing with a lot of what these like Wignat far right people would be saying along these racial lines. And something that always comes to me is like, I have family in like Africa. I can't specify where exactly, but like and an example I'd always give is like the Rwanda thing, like the Hutus and the Tutsis, like they're genetically pretty fucking close, and they were, it was everything like that sort of division. So it's like, it's just interesting to remind people that we're so like hyper racialized in America that like it's hard for people to remember that this is something that exists beyond just race. Like tribalism is something beyond that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, and like maybe some of our right-wing listeners won't like this as much, but like those racial categories, like depending on how big your window of time is, they break down. You know what I mean? So, at a certain point, it can't be the be all end all because they are at a certain scale pretty malleable. Yeah.
No, that's something that I have a very great privilege in terms of growing up in South Africa, is that I was exposed to the power of culture, and I was exposed to the differences in culture and the roles that culture plays. I mean, Americans talk about, well, let's zoom in a little bit. American right-wingers like to talk about, for example, black Americans and white Americans. I'm talking about more far-right race essentialist type of guys. They like to talk about like these two, almost like they're two tribes, like there's the black tribe and the white tribe. I'm like, as a South African, I'm looking at like my black compatriots in South Africa, or black South Africans, and there's just this massive amount of different cultures there. And I'm looking at America and I'm like, yeah, those guys are pretty much just Americans, dude. Like white Americans and black Americans are so close to each other culturally. Take it from a South African, I can tell you about what cultural differences are.
Oh yeah.
In South Africa, a real cultural difference is when one culture doesn't allow marriage with the other culture because there's some type of 500-year-old blood feud. Or, for example, one culture believes that you can pretty much what is it called? I'm sometimes I think in Afrikaans and I'm looking for a word, but the word I'm looking for was muti. So muti is in South Africa where you create a potion with human body parts and it heals all types of diseases. Now, that is a cultural difference. If you take, for example, a Westerner and you tell him, well, here's a people you share a country with that believes you can cure diseases with human body parts potions. That's a cultural difference, not this black American listens to rap and a white American listens to country. That's not a cultural difference, dude. You need to come to South Africa sometime, then you'll see what cultural differences are. But yeah, that's one of the big things that I think South Africa can teach a lot of people in the West is what really defines your people, what defines your tribe. And for me, my tribe or my people are people that share my culture, people that share my values, people that I can live in a community with and know that they speak my language, they share my religion, and they share my values. And this is what you see in South Africa when the shit hits the fan, is that people don't fall back on race, they fall back on culture.
That's a great point. That's a great point because, like I said, I have family with origins to Africa, and like there's what's surprising to a lot of people is that there's beef between African people and black people in America, black Americans.
I'm quite aware.
Something, See, you know what's up, but like basically, like if you tell someone that here, that might, maybe it's just a white American or just like doesn't know about that, like they'll find that very surprising. Like, well, you guys are the same, but like, and even the old point of like, oh, Africans sold other Africans into slavery, like it wasn't like a kidnapping, like there was a deal, there was like money, there was a bartering thing, like that whole thing. Like it's hard for people to wrap their minds around when they only think in terms of like racial reduction. It's hard. Yeah, but that's a great point. Yeah.
Try. I mean, don't play on hard if you lose on easy, dude. Black Americans and white Americans speak the same language, share the same religion, share very large partly the same heritage and same history. If you look at South Africa, dude, you don't share. Oftentimes, their denomination of Christianity doesn't match yours, so it's pretty much a very large, to a large extent, a different religion. Culturally, very vastly different. Heritage-wise, or not heritage-wise, history-wise, you get a lot of cultures that overlap because they either fought alongside each other against other factions or fought against each other. But in South Africa, you see real differences. If Americans are playing on easy mode, hard mode would be trying to do diplomacy with people that don't share your culture, don't share your religion, and don't speak your language.
Well, it's very interesting because we're talking about this, and what kind of comes to mind is how much attention is paid to characterizing like the divide in American politics between kind of, the civilized crowd versus reactionary, specifically white working class, when really, generally what it is it's basically a class war. And we've talked about it on this show of, a lot of the time it can be kind of characterized as maybe unflattering, factions more aligned with global capital than national. People, a more small business class, a more blue collar versus more like metropolitan professional. And it's very interesting because I remember somewhat recently we were talking about this, and we were talking about the cultural divide is, in my mind, artificially being ripped more and more apart. Or made wider, I guess is the better way of phrasing that.
Right.
And we had talked about, I guess as of last year, we just have 2 national like Independence Days now. It's either July 4th if you're a Republican.
I'm away.
Yeah, you know exactly what I'm talking about, or Juneteenth, right? And I think realistically, I feel like my co-host would probably like agree with me on this. For the most part, I feel like that divide really isn't nearly as much as it's cracked up to be. I doubt that most average normal people are really struggling with like roasting weenies for 4th of July.
No, all my neighbors and who are black, they were all really out there barbecuing on the 4th of July and on June 19th, bro.
Right. But it does make you kind of wonder, like, you're talking about like how difficult it is to have a dialogue and cooperate with people that have completely different value systems than you. And
not just value systems, they see the world differently. They have a different worldview than you.
Well, 100%. And it does raise alarm bells for me a little bit, because I see that kind of being willed into existence over here, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I completely understand where you're coming from. A good example of how these types of dynamics play out. And I'm glad before I go into that, I'm glad the conversation has steered into this domain, because it's a more abstract side of of politics that I think is not often discussed. For example, not just on the right, but more just in general, is some of the dynamics that play out in other countries in the world. Everyone is so focused on America. They just think it's like that Rammstein song of "We All Living in America." Well, there are countries out there with completely radically different dynamics. So let me use an example. There's 2 main, to maybe put it simply, 2 warrior tribes in South Africa. That's the Zulus and the Afrikaners. The 2 like most stubborn, most worshipping of testosterone tribes in South Africa. So the Zulus are pretty much the guys that, if you've ever heard of Shaka Zulu, he was pretty much their Napoleon. He was a revolutionary general in South African history. And the Zulus and the Afrikaners, I've told you the brief history already. So we've had clashes between those 2 tribes, but also those 2 tribes have found common ground in the fact that they both beat the British Empire. So when AfriForum, the organization that I work for, we pretty much strongly represent Afrikaners, but we also represent other minorities, because we fight for minority rights in South Africa. Now, that's a strange inversion for American ears, because when you think about minorities, you're not thinking a white minority and linguistic and cultural minorities. You're thinking just in racial terms, and you're thinking about Latino or black minorities. But in South Africa, just to get back on point, so AfriForum I wouldn't say AfriForum represents the Afrikaner community, but we are a strong player within it. So our representatives were invited to the Zulu King. Yes, South Africa still has a monarch. He's not in control of the entire country, but he wields a lot of power over the Zulu nation, the Zulu people as a culture. So we were invited to the King's birthday party, and our representatives, and AfriForum's representatives were sitting there, and the Zulu King stood up and he said, "It is a great honor to be in the presence of the only other tribe in this country that has beaten the British Empire.
Hey,
and
salute.
this is a common ground between a black tribe and a white tribe, two cultures that have fought against each other, but they also have that bonding characteristic. So I, for example, have a lot more time for a Zulu South African, if we're just going to be having a chat, than I would, for example, have with a white, I don't know, a Slovenian or Czech. Someone that I don't share a history with. I share a race with them, but I don't share a history with them. I can have a very nice chat with a Zulu South African because we share a history. He knows his history, I know mine. We know where our two tribes have clashed, but also what we have in common. And another good example would be the Tswanas in South Africa. So the Tswanas are another black tribe here. And I went on a mission in 2020, early 2020, before this whole new pandemic paradigm started. We, AfriForum, went on a mission to the Baroka Seleka tribe. So not to get into too much of the nitty-gritty details, this tribe had been dethroned through some dirty dealings by ruling party representatives to gain power over the throne. And they are the rightful heirs to the throne, but they were dethroned through some strange practices and loopholes. So AfriForum went to assist them. And when we arrived there, so me and my colleague Barend Ace are sitting there in the house of the princess and the royal family. And she is, firstly, very, very impressively, I was shocked to see the princess is bringing us tea and bringing us bread and stuff that she's made, because in their culture, you show respect through serving. So you serve your guests, even if you are much higher status than them, even if you are the king or the queen or the princess. And one of the elders that was sitting there made a remark that actually made a big impact on me, because it gave me some valuable perspective that I've already shared with you tonight. And that is, he said, back in the 1800s, we helped the Boers during, I can't remember exactly what the battle was, but there was a certain battle where the Boers were fighting the British, and our wagons were stuck and we didn't have enough oxen to move them. So Chief Maroka, the ancestor of this tribe that we're helping now, sent us oxen to help move our ox wagons into a more strategic position. Oh, no, this was not during the Boer War. It was during the Great Trek. But anyway, so this elder, while we're sitting there, says, just as it's nice to see that because when we helped you 200 years ago and now the Boers are back to return the favor. And we just went through the story because they have a very strong oral tradition. Their history is not written down. Their history is passed through oral tradition from parent to child, elder to descendant. And they still remember how we worked together, their tribe and the Boers, 200 years ago. And here I am sitting in the presence of the royal family, the descendants of that chief. And they're talking about as if it happened yesterday.
Yeah, this is an interesting. I'm glad this is becoming more of an abstract conversation because, well, for one, we have a 2-week delay on our episodes, so it's helpful that we're not too current because you never know what's going to happen in 2 weeks or whatever. But yeah, this is an interesting point of the conversation because like what you were saying about like American culture divides or whatever, like our impression of having these strong cultural divides, like when you're in the South, right? I was in New Orleans like very recently, and like Southern blacks and Southern whites are like this, you know what I mean? They're very close, you know what I mean? Like culturally, it's almost they're super close. So it's like that's another thing. But I think one thing I wanted to ask was like the Pan-African thing that you mentioned before.
Yeah.
I don't have strong feelings about it. One, because I'm American and I don't I don't care because I'm American. I'm primarily concerned with American things because I'm here or whatever. But I think that's an interesting question I have, and with these examples you're bringing up is like, so you, from what I can tell, you have a more critical view of that ideal. You think it's very utopian, from what I gather, right?
Yeah.
That makes sense. I wonder what do you think in terms of like, again, I don't have any strong feelings either way about this, but like, do you think there's any merit in the idea of it being like a practical alliance against a greater enemy, like the Europeans, or like, you know, and the globalist neoliberal order, basically, that we're all, you know, putting the boots on all of us, basically, wherever you're from.
Yeah, no, I get where you're coming from.
Yeah. I just wonder if you think there's any maybe strategic value, not in value of like, all right, we can get along and we'll be happy together. I don't think that, but like, do you think there's any strategic value in like, yo, like, we're different tribes, we're not gonna get along, we're very different, but you and I have a common enemy that's stronger than both of us, and maybe there's more. You're less of a priority in terms of my enemy, and we have a kind of
Gaddafi, big critic of like the global banking system, that kind of thing. Right? Like putting it in that kind of perspective.
I know exactly where you're coming from. Now that makes perfect sense up until the point where you consider that Pan-Africanism serves the global elite. It serves the globalist liberal agenda of turning Africa into just one massive borderless economic labor camp zone. That's what it does.
Like you said, like the European thing, like the Pan-Europeanism, EU. But yeah, absolutely. And so you have a YouTube channel, right?
Yeah, called Conscious Caracal. So you can, and it's always funny when people ask me like, so how did you choose your username? What was your plan? I'm like, well, if I had a plan of like becoming or creating like a YouTube channel where I'm going to create regular content and I'm going to create a brand around this username, I would have chosen a username that's easier to spell.
And pronounce, because I know CRK came on here and it said carceral, like the carceral system.
I did.
Yeah, so a caracal is that cat that's my profile picture. My profile picture was actually taken by one of my good friends. It's a cat, a wild cat that you find here in the South African veld, a rooi cat or a caracal. So yeah, if anyone is interested in checking out that type of content or this type of content that we discussed tonight, you can just check out my YouTube channel under the same name, Conscious Caracal. You can follow me on Twitter, same name.
Awesome.